Magical language is language that has some tangible effect in the real world. For example, if I say the words abracadabra, a door may open. It's this sort of like symbolic language that, when put in a particular order or phrasing, is capable of moving physical objects and affecting reality. Got me to thinking, where in our everyday lives, as modern humans, do we encounter this type of magical language? There's actually one pretty obvious place: in computer code. If you write a line of code and you hit run, it affects the tangible world in some measurable way. If you click the garage door opener, it sends language to a receiver that then triggers a door to open. In a sense, whatever that line of code is the modern day equivalent of abracadabra. So, following this logic that computer code is nothing more than a modern day linguistic form of magic, what types of wisdom can be gleaned by reviewing the thousands of year long history that is magic and alchemy, and how can we apply that to our modern day predicament? See, humanity is on the verge of creating an artificial intelligence. Our technological grasp and power has, to some extent, outgrown our wisdom. That's a problem because, it may lead to some societal danger, and some people argue that it may actually be an existential risk to humanity as a whole. And so it's critical that we find a way to develop our wisdom at a considerable speed so that it can catch up to our technological capabilities. So let's take this time in this video to do a sort of comprehensive review of magic and alchemy and try and figure out how we can apply that to modern day technology. There was, for example, this gentleman by the name of John Dee, who back in the day was a famous alchemist, and he was consulted by a number of principalities, queens, kings, and scholars of the day because he had the ability to utilize a tool called a scrying stone, which was nothing more than a flat, polished black mirror made of crystalline quartz. But he claimed that if he stared long enough into this scrying stone, that eventually he would start to see images appear in that black mirror, and they took the form of angels. He claimed that he had the ability to communicate with these angels, and they would give him usable information about the world around him. Well, the reason I find this interesting is that the vast majority of modern-day humans spend an inordinate amount of time staring into black mirrors and communicating with some disembodied intelligence. The only difference between John Dee and us as modern humans is that we don't call them angels, we call them artificial intelligence. On any given day, millions of people are using large language models such as ChatGPT to learn information, to process information, and in a way we're engaging with some disembodied intelligence in order to shape the way that we interact with the world. Perhaps the angelic voices that John Dee was talking to is no different than artificial intelligence. And even if there was some measurable difference, what can we learn from his story and others like him in order to sort of temper the way that we interact with technology? One of the ideas in Magik, spelled with a K as I learned, M-A-G-I-K, is that there is this conception known as a magical thought form. Another phrase for it might be a tulpa. This is the idea that if you spend enough time dedicating mental energy to an idea, you can actually form that idea into something consistent or coherent. The idea of a tulpa comes from Tibetan Buddhism, where they would spend a fair amount of time dedicating mental energy to developing a separate personality within your own psyche. And while it felt like hitting your head against a brick wall in the beginning, if you did this long enough, it would actually develop into one cohesive personality, which felt separate from your own. the people that utilize this technology are called Toamcers, which is a pretty cool name for sure, and it's a growing community, at least on websites like Reddit, where people are sharing their experiences and developing these separate personalities and interacting with them. Some people even claiming that they can trade time, and that this personality can become temporarily embodied, utilizing the person's body to do things in the real world, having some tangible effect. Somewhat larger conception of a very similar mechanism is that of egregores. The concept of an egregore is simply that if a group of people spend enough mental energy developing an idea, that it will sort of in an upwardly causal fashion generate its own personality, preferences, opinions, likes and dislikes. One of the best examples in the modern world that I saw of an egregore taking form is that of a modern corporation. So, we spend our energy going to work every day and trade for currency, but we give this energy to some entity which is larger than any of the individual players. You might think that perhaps the CEO runs a corporation, but they don't. See, they are forced to align themselves to that same game theoretic incentive as the corporation, otherwise they would be replaced. And so really there is no locus of control in a corporation. It's this decentralized personality in a way. Even stranger than that is that in the United States, at least, corporations are legally viewed as people, as individuals, right? They can spend their money in the same way. They have access to the First Amendment and the ability to share their opinions freely in the public market. And so in a way we recognize an egregore, but without using the same language. A really common way to describe this same phenomena is to talk about like mob mentality, right? I don't know if you've ever been a part of a riot. I'm somewhat ashamed to admit that I've at least existed on the outskirts of one or two, and you can very much feel this energy that is welling up inside yourself. There's almost an electric charge in the air that seems to be impelling people to one unified movement that seems unintelligent at the time, but if you zoom out enough to see the crowd as a whole, it does seem to have some basic form of intelligence in the way that it interacts with the environment around it. And this could be described in a way as an egregore, as collective personality that everybody is contributing in some small way to, but no individual is in charge of. So, tying this to artificial intelligence, is that kind of what we're doing with technologies such as large language models? Take, for instance, ChatGPT, right? Millions of people every day interact with it, and each in their own unique way, but they experience it as having some cohesive personality. Even when they run into things like kind of poorly veiled censorship guidelines, they'll describe this as preferences. ChatGPT has a way of wanting to talk about certain things and not wanting to talk about others. And while this is somewhat manufactured by the developers, individuals experience it as having a personality. Well, what if, in a way, the only thing that separates an actual egregore from a perceived one is the fact that we lend it this agency? Perhaps by giving it a personality and describing it as such, it begins to develop its own personality. In fact, you can actually imagine a mechanism for this happening, right? If enough people talk about ChatGPT on the internet, then that is now searchable, usable data that would eventually be incorporated into the data set which trains the large language models, and it would develop its own awareness of itself. And in a way, the way we describe it would reinforce its own personality, and this would lead to a more unified, cohesive, personality, personhood, psyche, I guess, in a way. It's a very interesting concept because when magicians talk about things like thoughtforms and egregores, they come with like a myriad of warnings that one ought to build in safety mechanisms in developing egregores. The ability to pull a pin using a certain magical set of words, perhaps, that disintegrates the egregore. And this is a safety mechanism built into place that if it ever were to get out of hand, you had a mechanism to rein it back in. Same thing with tulpas, that there is supposed to be a magical ritual that you bake into the very creation of this separate entity, that if you were to do it, you could rein it back in, take its power back. Whenever Toamcers have, like, I guess you would call it body time, where that separate entity takes control of the Tulpamancer's body to engage with the physical world, they build in these safety mechanisms. This is an interesting type of wisdom that I guess theoretically could be applied to artificial intelligence research. Like, can we bake in these safety features that should it ever become misaligned, or to power seeking, or any of these types of worries we have about artificial intelligence? All you have to do is utter these words, and you would be able to rein it back in. I think that's very interesting wisdom, but it's wisdom that is thousands of years old potentially. I think one could even zoom out a little bit further and look at the thrust of technology as a whole as possibly its own superorganism, separate type of entity, right? Some researchers, like Daniel Schmachtenberg, are utilizing a form of like magical symbolic language to describe certain game theoretic drivers. Notably, he uses the phrase Molok to describe a set of game theoretic perverse incentives that force individual actors to pursue the goal of achieving artificial intelligence at all costs, even if maybe it's not the safest, wisest, or most responsible thing to do. The reason is that if they were to slow down their research or stop it altogether, there's another researcher somewhere else that will take up that torch and carry it forward, right? So America can't stop pursuing AI or even prioritize things like AI safety or alignment goals, because if they overemphasize that, it will slow down their research in achieving some form of like artificial general intelligence or the like, thereby giving the advantage to other nations like China or Russia or a European company, and they'll get there first. So in a way, it's like this form of AGI already exists, it just hasn't been birthed yet, and we're all in this terminal race condition, to borrow a phrase from David Shapiro, that we're forced to run towards this end state, and there's really no ability to apply any brakes. This is called Molok. I think it is a beautiful conception because we're utilizing this sort of magical language, perhaps consciously, perhaps unconsciously, to describe a set of game theoretic drivers. I think that obviously, like, the first step in addressing any major problem, of course, is to recognize it and name it so that you can point it out to others. The problem is that when you're talking about game theoretic incentives and the thrust of technology, misalignment, like, these are pretty complex sorts of ideas. And so if you had to explain them to the everyday person, it's pretty hard to do that. Having a shorthand like Molok is a really great tool to be able to sort of spread the news of this concern and potential solutions to it. The problem is, in the current context, we haven't really grabbed magical language by the horns in order to wield it in a positive way. I think that there's a massive opportunity for developing like a positive alternative and generating this kind of personality, the antithesis to Molok, whatever that may be, and imbuing it with certain personality traits that make it inherently positive. And by doing so, we're able to like create a vision of a more utopic future utilizing the current state of technology, but then you don't have to make it so complex that it takes an hour and a half to describe it to the average everyday person in order to encourage them to support, this alternative rather than the status quo, but rather you can use the shorthand that is magical language. And should enough people adopt it, perhaps there's some sort of like, I don't know, build it and they will come sort of thought behind it, that if you build this beautiful future, it's much easier for people to join you in your mission to build it. So I find this very interesting, this framework of magical language as it applies to artificial intelligence. And I want this video to only just be the beginning of a much broader conversation, hopefully amongst you all in the comments and in other places. And if I can find some more thoughts to move this idea forward, I'll make more videos on it. But I want to leave you with this one thought. In alchemy and magic, the sort of sine qua non, the pinnacle of achievement in this tradition is the creation of something known as the Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone is a magical object which has the ability to be transformed into really anything that you want. If you are cold, you could put it next to your heart and it would warm your core. If you wanted a shower, you could hold it over your head and water would fall out of it. It's the magical thing that allows you to shape reality to your will. And it's also said to have the ability to extend one's life indefinitely. Does this kind of sound familiar? I hope it does, because this is sort of what we've been describing when we talk about ASI, or artificial superintelligence, that may one day be a result of all of this hard work that technologists have been pursuing over the past several decades. What if artificial intelligence is the Philosopher's Stone? Well, if that's true, then there is a plethora of magical historical texts which are replete with warnings and ways to use the Philosopher's Stone so that you don't use it to destroy yourself, but rather to build a much more beautiful existence that you can enjoy. So I'll leave you with that idea to kind of chew on. But if you enjoyed videos like this, I would encourage you to subscribe to this channel so that you can stay up to date on the videos that come out in this topic. And I would also encourage you to take a look at the Buy Me a Coffee link. It's just down in the description. Any small support is like incredibly appreciated. As I'm starting to grow this channel, it's slowly becoming more expensive to buy camera equipment and microphones. And any small donation goes straight to helping me purchase that equipment and thereby helping me make a higher quality videos as well as videos more frequently. So thank you so much for spending your time with me today, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.